Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today's episode, we are diving into the life of Merle Haggard. All right, but first, I've got some dates coming up. Please come out and come see me. We're doing the 17th of April. I will be at the Stanislaus County Fairgrounds for the Stanislaus County Farm Bureau dinner. And then the 18th, we're going to be at the Sonora Tap Room in downtown Sonora. And then the 26th, I'll be at Crawdads on the Lake in Folsom. I get to open for the Cruz Brothers, so that's going to be great. So come on out and check that show out for sure. And then into May 1st, I'm doing Esplanade at Turkey Creek. And then May 3rd, I'll be at the Sutter Club in downtown Sacramento. May 10th, we'll be at Rancho Roble Vineyards in Lincoln. And May 31st is the Reno River Festival. So that'll be the Saturday, which they just announced that lineup. So that's gonna be great. So come on out, come see me. And then June 14th, I'll be at the Colusa County Fair. And then June 20th, I'm at Red Bus Brewing again. So come on out, come see a show. Thank you. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at Tyler & Co. _marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything, when he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. Marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. So Merle Haggard is another one of our kind of cornerstone, musical influences who, has left a very noticeable mark on everyone in country music and across different genres in all the years since then. And it's because his life was... it's the stuff of movies. His life up to being just into his 20s is just turn after turn after turn of like just tragedy and craziness and, fun and music and everything. He lived a wild life almost immediately. So he's born in 1937 in Oildale, which is in Southern California, kind of by Bakersfield. And the first 9 years of his life are kind of this idyllic childhood. He talks about it as like the kind of first and last sort of peaceful, quiet part of his life is his first 9 years. Because he's born, his dad worked for the railroad and had actually had moved to Oildale, after I think he lived back east, and I think his house or his the barn containing all of his worldly possessions burned down. And this is during the Great Depression. So but Merle Haggard used to talk about that as if other people just lost out from the Dust Bowl, or they couldn't get jobs, or they couldn't do it. And that kind of pushed him to California. But Merle's dad was there because this barn burned down. It wasn't because he couldn't hold a job or because anything else went wrong. He was doing fine, but then he just loses all of his possessions, moves the family to California, because if you're going to start over, you might as well start somewhere with more opportunity, I guess. And he somehow lands at this house that was an old boxcar, like a train car, that the landlord basically made a deal with him. Like, you fix that up into a house and then I'll let you live there for, relatively cheap. So Merle grows up in this house made from a boxcar and describes his dad as this guy that would like work a 10-hour day, come home and still have plenty of energy for, hanging out with Merle. And he talked about how his dad would, after working all day long, would come home, eat dinner, and then just offer to do the dishes and like tell his wife to go, hang out with the kids. And he was very hands-on and very Just seems like a kind, hardworking dude. And he was always, taking Merle fishing and kind of hanging out. He was a very hands-on dad. By all accounts, just a nice dude, kind of the cornerstone of the family. And that's great until he dies when Merle is 9 years old. And he dies he has an aneurysm, I think, a stroke, basically. So Merle and his mom come home one day to find his dad in the house where half of his body doesn't work. And I guess he had a stroke either just outside the house or in the living room and had managed to like drag himself into this chair. And so the next several days are just super traumatic for Merle Haggard because his dad got a little bit better kind of immediately after, in the hours, after they first find him, and they get him to the hospital, and he's, talking to nurses, and it seems like he might be okay for a minute. And then I guess in front of a nurse, he goes to sit down in the chair and kind of collapses, and then everything's it's just downhill from there. So I think when they first found him, I think he said it was Friday, and then by Tuesday he has another aneurysm and dies. So he never recovers from after they find him in the house. And anyway, so that obviously throws Merle Haggard's life into complete chaos. He's a 9-year-old kid who was super close to his dad, and now his dad's gone for no fault of anybody else's. He's otherwise seemed like a healthy dude. Nobody saw this part coming. And Merle's mom kind of proceeds to just do her best with what she had. But I mean, that's, there were, I think, 2 other siblings. I think Merle had an older brother and an older sister at the time. But so suddenly Merle's mom is having to, raise all 3 of them by herself. And so she's working jobs, and she's only got so much attention to spread around. And so Merle ends up left to his own devices for a huge chunk of time, even at like 9 or 10, and immediately starts getting into trouble. He's just not going to school. He in his biography, he talks about how he thought it was weird that the punishment for not going to school was that they would suspend you from school. So he's like, you can skip the day, and then to punish you, they'll send you home. And he's like, oh, that sounds like a good deal to me. So it didn't bounce off of him as a problem at all. He was like, all right, I just won't go to school then. And it was just a constant struggle to keep him out of trouble and keep him where he was, supposed to be. And he quickly, his dad worked for the railroad, and he grew up around the train yard and around trains, and this was during kind of the height of the sort of romanticization around like hobo lifestyle and freight train riding. And, Merle got that in his head as something that he wanted to do. So he starts freight train hopping at an absurdly young age. I think he's like 13 when he hops his first train, maybe not even. And one of the first times he does this, it's him and a buddy. They decide, we're hopping a train and we're going, wherever they were going. They didn't make it very far, but I think it was like Fresno or something. And but anyway, so him and his buddy, with just like the clothes on their back basically, and like a little like a pillowcase full of like snacks and maybe a shirt or something, and they get off the train at the next town, or however many towns down the road, and when they get caught by the railroad people, luckily, so I guess back then you didn't have to wait 3 days to put out a missing persons report. So by the time this happens, like a day later, there's a missing persons report from Oildale, and they're all looking for these kids that just took off. And but they find him, and they're just like, oh, what do you mean? Like this, why is this an issue? Come to find out, Merle could have ridden for free anyway. He didn't have to like ride in the wheel well of a train car and like hang on for dear life with the wind going by when he's 13. He could have just walked onto the train because his dad had been a railroad guy, and so the children of railroad workers get to ride for free until they're 18. So it was just a matter of Merle doing it because I think he told his mom, he said something to the effect of, anybody can ride with a ticket, it takes a man to hop the train. And this is a 13-year-old, 12-year-old kid. And so he quickly becomes sort of just too much for his mom to really deal with. And he ends up she sticks him in boarding schools, and he ends up as kind of a ward of the state, sort of. And he's in some pretty rough institutions, almost immediately. Because, so at 14, he's actually arrested for truancy. And this is where we start the institutional, kind of cycle here. And then they're also, for whatever reason, there does not seem to be the reaction in Merle's head of like, oh, I've been arrested. I should probably not do anything else to get in more trouble. He doesn't have that reflex at all initially when he's like 14. He's just like, oh, I've been arrested. I need to escape. And then I'll just go on hopping trains or whatever. So immediately, even from the time he's 14, he gets arrested or ends up in like a school for boys or whatever. And he's like immediately escaping. As soon as he, finds a lull in the action, he's out the door. And he had a couple, to the point where like initially it's all, like dash for the fence kind of thing. And then over the years, he figures out like, if you don't run fast, people don't chase you. And so there's a couple of times later in like, jail and everything where like he just walks off. Like he notices a spot in the crowd he can just kind of get lost in and just walks. At one point later in the story, he walks out the front door of a jail and no one stops him and he just continues on. But so that's kind of Merle's attitude, kind of leading into this stuff. And he's also just committing petty crime all over the place. Like in between spurts of being arrested and being, sent to the schools and stuff, like he's also just doing petty burglary stuff and just doing whatever he can to get some pocket money. At one point he told a story about how they would steal cars, but they would clean the car up and leave it with like a $20 bill on the seat with like a note that was like, thanks for letting us borrow your car. But nobody else thought that was funny. So they'd still get arrested for, Grand Theft Auto or whatever. It didn't matter that they cleaned it up and left it with gas money. But he used to just do that for fun. He'd just go like joyriding and stealing people's cars and then just leaving them better than he found them. But at one point, there's another funny story about him and his buddy doing this. I think they were in Ione at the time, which is another town in kind of central California. He and his buddy are walking through this little picturesque town, and it's in the town is outside of the kind of, not boarding school, but it's like it's the Preston School of Industry, I think is what it was called. And it was like a Reformation school for troubled boys. And him and his buddy noticed that this nice town is like kind of this Mayberry setting of like, nobody locks their doors. Nobody's, everything's in the right place. The streets aren't dirty. There's no kind of riffraff going on. And they're walking down the street like, man, this is a nice spot. Like where people, it's so nice that they can trust their neighbors. I bet they don't even, take the keys out of their car. Sure enough, walks up to the car in a driveway, reaches his hand in the window. The keys are in it. So him and his buddy jump in to steal this car in this nice neighborhood. And they're like, oh, isn't it nice that, people trust each other? Cranks the car up, goes to leave. Come to find out that for whatever reason, the person in this house left the keys in the car, but took the time to chain the axle of the car to the tree behind it. So they go to get in, go to drive off, make it, 10 feet, bang, almost throws Merle through the windshield. Him and his buddy get out. There's a loud commotion. The lights come on in the house and things. So him and his buddy decide the best thing to do is just go under the house. Like they just see like there's an opening to like the under part of the house there. And they just dive through this hole and they're hiding under this house as there's all this commotion and people are like trying to figure out where where the thieves went. And they wait there for several hours. And then they're watching, pairs of feet come and go. And they're watching two adult pairs of feet sitting there talking to each other and about how, talking about, oh, well, if we find, I bet they're long gone by now, but if we find them, we'll blah, 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 blah. And so they're watching these two adults kind of talk about what they would do if they caught, Merle and his buddy. And then a little kid walks up and Merle said that he was short enough that, they're looking out the hole in the bottom of this house. And so the little kid they can't see his head, but as his body walks into frame, they can see that he's wearing like a little kid gun belt with a cap gun in it. And he's like the little kid is after his dad, like, let's go find the bad guys who tried to steal our car. And I guess just like won't let up. And he's interrupting a conversation between the two adults. And the dad turns to the kid and he's like, I bet they're under the house and they're about to snatch you up if you don't be quiet, just to kind of get his kid to shut up. Well, the kid just like pulls his plastic gun out and goes crawling under the house to like, maybe they're in here. Sure enough, they were. And like all three of them freak out. And then then the adults realize what's going on. And sure enough, here come Merle and his buddy, and they just, get sat on the porch, and the police come get them, and they go back to back to jail. But, which is actually not the first time, or not the last time that Hank, geez, I keep saying that Merle almost gets in a bunch of trouble. So, at one point, he and his friend, so they were huge Lefty Frizzell fans, like, Merle Haggard loved Lefty Frizzell and would, just him and his buddy had heard, I can't remember the name of the town that his buddy thought Lefty lived in, but they just decided, he lives in that town in Texas. Let's just hop on a train and go there and we'll find him and, talk to him. And I think he might have been like 16 at this time. Hops on a train, makes their way to Texas. They get to the town in Texas that they were trying to get to, only to find out that Lefty Frizzell does not live there and they can't find him. So they start making their way back. And somehow they get separated. So Merle and his buddy, Merle and his buddy are not together anymore. So I think his buddy either got a job for a minute or he hitchhiked on his own. But Merle ends up by himself, trying to get back to California. And he ends up getting arrested for, I can't remember, it might have been for like stealing a car or something. Anyway, he ends up in jail right after this, and he escapes again. And while he's out running around, he knows immediately people are after him. So he's running from, the folks that are looking. And he ends up, I think it was like in a barn or something. He ends up like kind of burying himself in some, like grass and dirt and stuff to like get away from this group that's looking for him. They're like right behind him. And he's listening to these people talking about what they would do once they found him. Now, unbeknownst to Merle, at the time, he escapes jail. Around the same time, there was a rape in that town. And they were after the guy that had done it. And the people that were standing a few feet away from Merle Haggard at the time was the dad and brother of the victim. And they think that Merle is the guy that did it. So they just there's an escape and, an assault later. So they just draw the line, that's the same guy. And it didn't help that people that had, like, seen the actual perpetrator, he looked a lot like Merle Haggard. So the description that came through was like the two descriptions matched each other. So everybody thinks Merle Haggard has done this, and the dad and brother are in front of Merle, who's hiding in the bushes or whatever, talking about what they would do when they found him, and they're gonna kill him. Like this is not, we can't wait to, bring him to a jury of his peers. This dad and brother are talking about exactly what they're going to do. So now Merle realizes not only is he on the run just because he's snuck out of jail again, he's kind of running for his life now. And they go on, they miss him by just the grace of God. They don't find him somehow, even though he was like, the description's a little blurry. I'm not exactly sure how he was within feet of these people having this conversation, but he was. To the point where they leave, he gets up and takes off running to the highway where he was praying to run into a highway patrol officer. And he said it was weird for him to be praying to run into a cop at that point, but because he had said, like, the game had changed now. Now he's aware that there's this other crime that he's suspected of, and if the wrong people catch him, he's going to get killed. So takes off running, gets to the highway. Luckily, the first car he finds is a highway patrol officer, and the guy drives past him. Merle kind of waves. The guy turns around, comes back, and he's like, just immediately, I didn't do this. Like, you got to help me. These people are going to kill me if they find me. Like, I need you to take me back to the jail. And the cop was basically like, told Merle that he was lucky they didn't find him, because in the in the medium time, so between where they were in front of Merle and then they left, and then Merle finds this officer, in that span of time, they did find the actual guy. But if they had found Merle first, it'd have been a real problem. But like minutes before he meets this highway patrol officer, they find the actual guy. So the cop just kind of laughs and takes Merle back to the jail, and, here we go. So, and that's kind of, that's the speed that Merle Haggard is living his life, through his teens and into his early 20s here. And I mean, he's also working side jobs. Like, he's working in the oil fields. He's, I think he's driving trucks at one point, just kind of doing whatever he could get his hands on. And then he meets a girl named Leona Hobbs. He was 18 and I think she was 16 at the time. And he meets her as he's, because he'd been given a guitar when he was really little. So as all this is going on, he's also like a musician and he plays, mostly for himself. And he was really, like I said, he was a huge Lefty Frizzell fan. And so as he's being a delinquent, he's also developing as a musician, and he's playing in some small gigs and stuff to make some money. And it's at one of these gigs that he meets Leona Hobbs. And they proceed to have a relationship that seems to oscillate between being very, like, in love and very toxic. Like, they, as some do, just bouncing back and forth. And because she gets pregnant pretty early on. And then that relationship actually ends up turning so bad that it gets like physically violent, but it sounds like it was it was both ways. Like, they were both super, like, violent to each other at some point, it sounds like. But so that doesn't last for too long. But one of the main obstacles to that marriage, other than that, is that Christmas of, I think, 1957. Okay, Christmas Eve of 1957. Merle and his buddies have bounced around to every job they can. At one point, it was like he literally told Leona, like, "Oh, we're going to Texas to work the oil fields because I can't get a job in Bakersfield. I'll send you money." And he leaves he robs a gas station to get the money to drive to Texas where he can have a job to send money back to Bakersfield. So to leave, he had a job at a Shell gas station beforehand. And he still had the shirt, and he knew where they kept all the money, and he knew the type of lock they used. So Merle just goes to the store, buys the same type of lock, goes to that Shell gas station that he used to work at, watches the guy that works there. Like, in the morning, he unlocks the one padlock on this gate that they kind of kept everything behind. Merle just walked up and switched the locks out because they would just leave it hanging open on the chain. So Merle switches the locks out and then just backs off and watches. End of the day, at 10 o'clock, the guy closes up everything, locks that lock onto the thing, and leaves. Merle comes up 10 minutes later, unlocks that with his key, goes in wearing his Shell t-shirt, and is actually seen by one of the, like, night guard people that's in this lot, and just kind of waves at him. He waves, and the safe was left open. Merle grabbed $150 out of there and then left. Like, locked up behind himself, put their lock back on behind himself. Like, he kept their lock, takes his off, puts theirs back on. So the next morning when the Shell gas station people show up, the lock was never, to them, it's like, we were robbed with no one cutting a chain or breaking a lock or anything. It just, like, disappeared. And I guess the poor guy that worked there ends up getting fired. But Merle never gets caught for that crime. So now he's got $150, and that gets him to Texas, I think. But that doesn't go very well, and that soon falls apart, and he ends up hitchhiking back to California. And by the time he gets back to California, he only has like $12 to his name or something. So it was like a few months of this. And obviously his relationship with Leona at this point is, he can be gone for months at a time, and that's not the worst thing that's going on. And so he ends up back in California. It's Christmas of 1957. And they are flat broke. No money left. Christmas is here. Everything's depressing. And he decides, so a buddy comes over to have dinner with them on Christmas Eve, and he proceeds to get kind of hammered with his buddy, and somehow in their drunken frenzy, they think it's a good idea. They're going to go rob this restaurant that they knew the guy that owned the restaurant was like a family member of one of Merle's close friends or something. Like there was a connection to the people that owned it, but they were going to go rob this restaurant because then we can put on Christmas was the plan. So they load up the Merle and his buddy, and Leona and the two kids in the back seat. And they drive to town to go rob this restaurant. And somehow, between the three adults in the car, first of all, nobody says this is a bad idea and we shouldn't do it. And maybe Leona did, but it didn't work. They get to the restaurant. Merle jumps out with a crowbar. He rips the screen door off the back of this restaurant, jams his crowbar, and he's blasting the back door off of this thing. Come to find out, the restaurant is open. It's full of people, and the manager comes to the back door and opens and is like, what are you guys doing? Like, why don't you come around the front? And, like, literally just has a moment of, like, what is happening here? Well, Merle and his buddy we've been caught. They just take off running into the dark, jump into their car that has Leona and the babies in it, and they drive off. Well, so they didn't actually rob the restaurant or anything. And at this point, they've damaged the door, I guess, is really the only crime committed so far. But they drive off in the car, but Merle's drunk and he doesn't have the headlights on. And he ends up getting pulled over. And the owner of the restaurant did call the police, and he was just said that they tried to rob him, I guess. Whatever the interaction was, the guy that owned the restaurant knew who it was and why they were there. So the police are out looking for Merle and his buddy, and they arrest him. And he actually tries to run. So at one point, because now he knows the cops are here, he looks into the back seat where there was just the way the cars were parked, the way the headlights were situated. He realized that there was a dark kind of path out in front of the car that he was in. And so as the cops are getting out of the car behind him, he just looks back at Leona and says, hey, I got to go. They won't hurt you. If I'm going to stay out of jail, I need to take off running. So he takes his boots off for some reason, gets out of the car and tries to take off into the dark, but he doesn't get very far. He gets arrested. And so he ends up in the jail for attempted burglary, or for burglary, because he ends up getting convicted of that deal. So, but like soon after that though, he does his old trick where so he's in the jail, but he's kind of buddy with all these people know him. He's been in and out of jail and, since he was a little kid. And at this point, I think he's only 20. And somehow there's a lull in the action. He just strolls out the front door of the jail and nobody stops him. And he just somehow just kind of gray manned his way out of there and just leaves out the front door and proceeds to, he says that right before this happened, he'd been praying that he could get a chance to say a better goodbye to his friends and family, because he knows he's going up for this. Probably he's going to be gone for a while. He didn't really say bye to his kids. He didn't really say bye to Leona other than see you later. And so, that was his regret. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye. Someone leaves the front door open, or somehow he sees his way out. Boom, leaves out the front door. And his intention seems to be immediately, he just needs to get to say goodbye. And then he's going to I think his initial plan was to hop a train and really be gone. And so through a couple of different friends, he ends up at this hotel, and a buddy of his is driving to go get certain people to bring him to Merle so that he can say goodbye. And so he does get a chance to say bye to his wife and kids, and he says goodbye to I think his uncle. And so he kind of has that moment. But then soon afterwards, the same officer that had arrested him earlier, the night before, the same guy shows up to get him again, and they have a moment of just kind of just being friendly, where Merle is like, all right, man, like, I'm going, I know. Like, before you put me in cuffs, can I take a shot of this, like, whiskey? And the cop jokingly was like, yeah, man, like, and I think the cop might have even taken a shot with him and then cuffed him and took him to jail. And that's that. Yeah. And so enters Merle Haggard back into the system. And at the time, no one crime of his rap sheet is that severe. It's all like petty burglaries and stuff, and like, you know, just stuff like that. It was just like in Merle's mind, he was just grabbing what he needed when he needed it, and, you know, didn't really hurt anybody. And so he ends up going to, it wasn't the county jail, it was like a separate facility that I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was like kind of a staging area where, like, you know, kind of like a boot camp-esque facility where you awaited your more permanent sentencing. And usually it was like juvenile hall for that, like, you know, even the kids that went to juvenile hall, they went to this place first, and then they would kind of wait for the scheduling and for the, you know, logistics to work. Okay, you're going to this juvenile hall or this prison or this whatever. And so Merle is just in there waiting for his letter to come telling him where he's going next. And he's thinking he's just going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be stuck in jail for, you know, a couple of months or something. I don't know how bad he thinks it is. And he gets a letter, and he says when he grabbed the letter off the, you know, through the bars or whatever, the light caught it just right where he saw the word San. And he knew in that moment that meant San Quentin prison, which was a problem. It was like Alcatraz at the time. Like, that was, you did not want to go there. And so, and he'd been sentenced. The sentencing window here was like 6 months to 16 years or something, was like how much leeway the judge had. They handed him a 15-year sentence just for like the totality of his crimes, I guess. I don't know. They sent him to San Quentin with a 15-year sentence. And that's his first moment of being like, oh, like, I might need to change how I am as a person, because now he finds himself going to, you know, a pretty hardcore prison in, you know, in the 60s. Or well, I guess late 1950s. And so this is where he starts to kind of run into some hard consequence, because he quickly starts doing all kinds of, like, brewing his own beer. Like, he's, you know, brewing hooch and selling it to people in, like, in the prison. He's kind of making friends where he can, but he kind of keeps a relatively low profile. But he also, like, I think he does. No, there's an escape attempt by somebody who was close to him, and that guy ends up getting killed, I think, that was, you know, left a mark, so he's not going to continue with those kind of efforts. But while he's there, he ends up in solitary confinement for a little while. And I can't remember the guy's name, but he ends up in solitary confinement with a guy who was like a convicted serial rapist and murderer. But him and Merle are talking to each other through an air vent. So they're both in solitary confinement, but they're just like yelling through the air vents to each other, having conversations. And I don't know what led Merle to this belief, but he described him as a political prisoner. And he, like, had a lot of empathy for the guy. Really, he felt bad because that guy was later taken to the gas chamber and killed. And that's, like, the inspiration for that song, I think, Sing Me Back Home. But anyway, yeah, so, like, for whatever reason, Merle didn't see that guy as this, like, evil character that the legal system seemed to have, and they killed him for it. So, but it was having talked to that dude for, I guess, a while. Like, it wasn't like one conversation. They kind of developed a little, you know, through the air duct friendship. And seeing that guy put to death did sort of light a fire under Merle. And, you know, he just sort of reaffirmed, you gotta change what you're doing. And this is not going to work. So, Merle decides that he's done fighting the system on this deal. And he's going to try everything he can to get out of prison early, like on the correct side of the books. So he starts volunteering for all the jobs that nobody wants. Like all the, you know, he's doing like laundry and cleaning up stuff, like whatever. And he ends up teaching other inmates how to play music. He ends up like just doing what I think he was working in the textile mill at one point. Just like he just kind of put his nose to the grindstone and decided, I'm going to do whatever I can to get good behavior leniency as quick as I can get it. And it's during this time, so when Merle's kind of become somewhat of an upstanding prison citizen. This is I think it's New Year's Eve of 1958. I think Johnny Cash shows up to do his performance at San Quentin. Now, Johnny Cash was playing, prison shows were something that he liked to do. He just kind of took pity on the, people of the prison system, and he liked to do shows for those guys. And so he shows up to San Quentin in 1958, and there's Merle Haggard in the audience. And Merle Haggard sees in Johnny Cash somebody who was just as much of a delinquent as he was, making something out of himself through music, which I guess had not occurred to Merle as being like a real option, that he could become that and he could still be a success through music despite all his track record. So he hangs on to that performance from Johnny Cash. Like that really is kind of a fire lighting moment for Merle Haggard. And so a couple of years later, I think, so that was 1958. A year and some change later, in 1960, he gets paroled. So he served only a couple of years of his 15-year sentence. And Merle gets paroled, and he goes back to Bakersfield. And this is where he jumps kind of headfirst into the music thing. Now, this is also where there was a little bit of a time discrepancy where he goes into jail with 2 kids, comes out, and there's 3 kids. So, and their marriage is not fully ended yet. So there's a lot of tension at home still. And that is not going well at all. That's a big stressor. But he's decided he's trying to do the straight and narrow thing, and he's jumping into music while his marriage is crumbling. And this is where he starts to kind of develop his chops too. So he's playing at clubs like the Blackboard, and he's playing like that we talked about in the Buck Owens episode. And it's during this time that he, ends up as a bass player for Buck Owens for a few minutes. And, I think he was like 5 months or something he was playing for Buck Owens, and he's the one that gave them the idea for the name the Buckaroos, which we talked about in our Buck Owens episode. But anyway, so this is where he starts getting a little bit of attention. He meets a guy named Fuzzy Owen, who, not related to Buck Owens at all, but who became his manager, and he owned a small record label. So this is Merle's first music getting released through this guy, Fuzzy Owen. And let's see here. Yeah, so this is 1962. So Skid Row is his first professional recording, and that's with Fuzzy Owen. And then in 63, he releases Sing a Sad Song, and this is the first time that his music hits the charts. So it's his first charting single, which I think topped out at number 19, I think. But he's starting to get some momentum now. He's starting to build, and, he's starting to get some attention. 1964, he releases Strangers, the album. He gets a top 10 hit with My Friends Are Gonna Be Strangers. That was written by Liz Anderson. So at this stage of the game, Merle is not he hasn't been recognized as the songwriter that he would later become. Because Merle Haggard in history now is a songwriter. That dude's, his poetic ear and his ability to put words, his economy of words and poetry are the stuff that he kind of set the standard for a guy that can write his own music and perform his own shows, and kind of not just be the next pretty face that Nashville feeds music to. And but his first few, are a kind of a mixed bag. So, My Friends Are Gonna Be Strangers, that's written by Liz Anderson. And then in 1965, he finally signs with Capitol Records, which is, that's a pretty good sign that you're getting somewhere. And that's where I'm a Lonesome Fugitive comes out. It's his first record with Capitol Records. Which it gets retitled to be The Fugitive. And this is, so things start to kind of roll for Merle here. He's finally starting to get some success. The money's coming, but his marriages are falling apart. Like that during that time window when he was working for Buck Owens, the part of the reason he didn't go on tour with Buck Owens very much longer was because he was trying to focus on his solo career, but also because his marriage was falling apart. And that was not, that was a big stressor for him. And so he goes on a couple of, some years later, I think it's in 1970. Well, okay, so he gets divorced in 1974 from Leona and marries Bonnie Owens, who was Buck Owens' wife initially. She's the one that her and Buck Owens met in, I think it was Arkansas, and they came out to California together, and then their marriage fell apart later because Buck Owens was a tough guy to nail down. I think his own description was that the most trouble he ever got himself in was because he had too many women that weren't his, which, like I said, as I said in the Buck Owens episode, he didn't have a drug problem. He didn't have an alcohol problem. He ran a really tight ship, except when it came to the ladies, and Buck Owens was kind of getting whatever he could get at the time. And so his marriage obviously did not work to Bonnie. And so, but by the time she marries Merle Haggard, there's no animosity here. And Bonnie Owens seems to be one of the most pragmatic, realistic thinking people of all the interviews you find. She has no resentment about that. And she has seems to have had no expectation that this would last forever. So she's not bitter towards Buck Owens. Then she gets married to Merle Haggard, and she was like, well, I knew this was a temporary thing, because of who he is. And then so they later get divorced, but they all stay friends. There's no animosity in this thing. And she actually, so when they get divorced, Bonnie Owens ends up as a bridesmaid in the next wedding, which I think it was the next wedding. There might have been one short one in the middle there. But anyway, so Bonnie Owens stays around, and they have a couple of kids together. Because I think Merle Haggard ends up, he has 5 kids, I think, throughout the different marriages. And but so he has a couple of children with Bonnie Owens, and that's this is also, we're getting into the 80s here, and so in 1980, him and Bonnie get divorced. And he, like I said, he gets married again pretty quickly there, I think, but it doesn't last very long, I don't think. But so again, personal life tanking sort of, and recording professional life doing just fine. This is the 80s. This is peak Merle Haggard, stuff. This is where we get Are the Good Times Really Over? That's the Way Love Goes. Kern River. This is, over several years here, but this is kind of that phase. And so we're starting to head into the period of time here where Merle Haggard is settling into his success. He's kind of a rock star now, and he's going pretty hard in the paint. So he gets a houseboat on Lake Shasta and describes this period of time. He's between marriages here, it sounds like. And this is right around the time he's getting inducted to the Country Music Hall of Fame, I think. It's like soon in this same kind of time period. But at one point on this lake, he's got a buddy that has a pontoon plane, and he would just park it at Merle's houseboat. They'd get up in the morning. His buddy would go up in the plane, look for where all the topless girls were hiding in the coves of Lake Shasta. He'd bring the plane back. They'd hop in Merle's boat and go find the ladies that he saw from the air, and then try to talk some of them into coming back to the houseboat, which they often did. And it was just a coke-fueled party for 5 years straight. And he ends up, this is also where his financial trouble begins. Because while he's doing the party boat deal, he decides he's going to buy into the resort there on the lake, and his business partner kind of swindles him, because I think it was $400,000 that they said they needed. Well, Merle had $400,000, but the business partner went to the bank to finance $400,000. The bank said, oh yeah, it's got Merle's name on it. Sure. Well, then the guy also took the $400,000 from Merle and spent that on what? So anyway, basically, Merle Haggard ends up, missing a bunch of money that was supposed to be, his. And he's getting in trouble with like the IRS and everything. And it's just financially, he goes through a pretty low point here. He has to declare bankruptcy. And we're into the early 90s now. And it's just famous, but having a rough go of things here. He has a mild heart attack in 1996. And so, but then he starts to kind of, correct here. So in 91, he meets Teresa Lane, who I believe he would be married to her until his death, in 2016, I think. So Teresa Lane, and she's the mother of Janessa and Ben Haggard. Okay. So, but anyway, so right after that, so this is where he gets remarried, and that seems to be a very positive impact on his life, but he does go through this moment of like bankruptcy and everything else. And then let's see here. I'm kind of jumping around the timeline a little bit here too. Before that, and I think 1970, I'll find it here on the list, 72, Merle receives a full pardon from Ronald Reagan, which was, kind of a feather in the cap moment, where I think at the time, or he might still be the youngest person ever pardoned by the governor like that, because Ronald Reagan was the governor of California. But anyway, so he's been pardoned, and he's kind of having fun with his life, and he's but so his last marriage, he really does seem to have put a lot of focus on being a dad again, because the first batch of kids, I mean, you can imagine, the first two kids were in the back of the car when he drunkenly tried to break into an open restaurant. So he's not like dad of the year at the time. And he packs that around. He has a lot of guilt about his first few kids that, he was not, and he knew it, he was not the dad that his dad had been to him for that, for the first 9 years. Like he had this ideal standard of a dad to look at, and he knew he had fallen very, very, very short of that with his first few kids. So the next two, Janessa and Ben, he seems to have, really put a lot of effort into being as big a part of their lives as he can. And it seems like seems like he did it. Ben Haggard is still, Ben Haggard's out there performing today. And Ben Haggard started playing in the band, I think, when he was 15. He started, as a guitar player. He became a really talented guitar player. And so, so he's bringing his kids around with him. I think Janessa, she didn't lean into the music too hard. I think she ends up going to culinary school, I think. But anyway, so for the last, I don't know what year that would have started. And I think Ben was born in 1992, I think. So after he's 15, he's traveling with Merle. So he's, they're playing shows, hanging out with him and his sons. And it's, it seems like a pretty positive time. But yeah. So then let's see here. So we're into 2000 and what year 2000 here? Okay. 2001. There he is. In 2001, as sort of a moment of, crescendoing success, he gets to perform at the White House. And Merle Haggard looks back on that with, as a highlight of his life, because it went from literally in jail for, a whole host of petty crimes and just, the decision-making process of the 1950s. 50 years later, he's playing in the White House for the president of the United States. And he looks back on that with, some powerful emotion, because, and fair enough, man, that's, and then in 2010, he receives the Kennedy Center honors with Paul McCartney and Oprah Winfrey. But anyway, so then the last few years, there's an interview where Merle is asked right to his face why do you keep doing it? And why are you like, because he, he was getting old. I mean, he was in his, 70s at the time. And he just said, I'm afraid of the loneliness. And it was just like a straight, I mean, it kind of cut the interviewer's legs off a little bit. It was like, why do you keep going? Why do you keep, doing this? And he's like, well, I'm afraid of the loneliness, and I'm afraid what happens if I stop, kind of thing. And which was just such an honest answer, and such a like kind of a look into why he was, in the gear that he was in. But that was Merle Haggard, man. He just kept going, and he loved putting on shows, and he loved, he didn't, he doesn't seem to have liked being alone very much. And, but he kind of, all of that ties back to his time at San Quentin. He never shakes that bug until, even at one point he describes his tour bus as like, he was showing some friend his tour bus, and he's like, gets to the bunk area, and he's like, it's the same size as my cell at San Quentin. And it was enough to kind of make the hair stand up on his, his friend's neck, and just be like, okay. Kind of, because this is decades later, and that's still what he anchored it to. And, but yeah, but Merle Haggard finishes out his life doing exactly what, he'd always loved doing. He performs until 2016. He dies of pneumonia. He was performing on stage with his son Ben, I think like 4 months before this happened. So he kind of just, he does seem in the end to have been able to kind of have his cake and eat it too, where he did get to kind of have a better relationship with his kids. The success had kind of rolled in, and he got to just do the troubadour thing until the end. And yeah, we're gonna have to do some more song specific Merle Haggard episodes probably, but I kind of wanted to get through and kind of go over, because I think over time here we're gonna have a better idea of all the musical connections that led to the modern day kind of country and pop music scene. And Merle Haggard was just a gigantic part of that. So, but yeah, so that's Merle Haggard. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week.